Hello, class. Welcome back. We are here, week 5, moving on from our Excel introduction last week. I'm excited to view some of those videos. Please look online. I know Andrew stopped in earlier and just gave me a little bit of feedback on some of the challenges with uploading, and just wanted to make sure that it did upload to the VidGrid website, and it did. I sent out the link again. Please be in contact with me to let me know if you cannot use that link. I'm working with Christy Boggs over in the education office to make sure that that works. And if there's a problem, just let me know and we will get that ironed out. Obviously, I have that open until tomorrow, so you might want to look at that today or tomorrow to make sure that gets done. I'm in the process of grading assignment number 2 right now. My goal is to have the first 3 all graded and up for you by the middle of next week, and hopefully then I can get these next 2 and get all caught up right before spring breaks. We'll be back on schedule with the grading. It definitely takes a little bit more time than when I used to do all these assignments just in class, and I could walk around and answer questions during that time. With that said, also, you guys will notice that, if I'm kind of a little bit of a stickler with some of my grading on the first round, you have the complete option to resubmit. I want you to do that. Look at the edits, look at the comments, make the changes, resubmit. You can get full credit for any of the assignments doing that. Once again, the purpose of this class is not to be a really, really hard class that's hard to get a decent grade in. No, it's to get some practical knowledge that you can use once you get out into the world and start working. So I want you to have all those opportunities to do that. All right, so we'll switch gears and we'll start talking about today's topic, tables and figures. This is kind of one of those skills that I remember my mentor just assumed I would have when he asked me to write my first paper, and I struggled with PowerPoint and Excel to get figures that were pretty mediocre when I look back on them now. So what I'm going to do today is take you through the construction of one table, one figure, and kind of tell you some of the pitfalls and some of the small things I do to make sure that they are publication quality. This is creating figures for publications. Today is what we're going to talk about. Most of the time, you can reuse those figures in your presentations. So if you make one that's good enough for publication for your thesis defense, that just saves you time for having to redo it. Sometimes you'll want to change your figures up a little bit for a presentation if you want to add some color, or just change the scale of some of the different things. But generally, if you start with a good kind of formatting on the first one, it's a little bit easier to move it around. So what I want to start out with is just this quick little article that I'm going to post online as well that has 10 simple rules for better figures. That's kind of where we're going to start today, and then we're going to move into tables and figures as well. Okay, great article here from Nick, Mike, and Phil. First one is know your audience. And what I'm going to say about this one, rule number 1, know your audience. If you're creating it for a publication, your audience is your reviewers, okay? And the first one, before it even gets there, it's the editor of the journal. And if you haven't submitted to a journal before, the journal has, what I'm going to pull up right here, information for authors. So let's just clear out this stuff so we can really focus in on this. Any journal that you're going to submit to is going to start out with its information for authors. What this is the specific requests by that journal that are for this exact formatting. Okay, and if you go onto the Medicine, Science, and Sports and Exercise website, you can eventually find a link to say, okay, let me find the information for authors. And if we're making tables and figures, let's scroll all the way down, and we're going to talk about author information a little bit later in the semester as well when we get to submission. Okay, here we go. Part 2, manuscript submission requirements and preparation. You'll see all this language, electronic submission, keep on scrolling, and eventually, here's technical guidelines. It talks about how to make equations. Here we are, tables and figures. So this gives us some general requirements for what this journal wants. They say the table should be double spaced, table should have a brief caption, table has to have means and a unit of variation. Okay, we're going to talk about how to add that in a minute. And then abbreviations. Up here, this is the big one that I want to highlight for figures, black and white line art. Okay, most figures are going to be in black and white. Obviously, you're going to use color if you do a presentation. You can also use black and white for that too. But the reason they do that is because if they actually print the figures, it costs more to print them in color. And if you are the author, if you want something printed in color, you're going to have to pay, which you don't want to do. And I'm sure your mentor doesn't want you to do at this point, unless it's a really cool figure that requires some color to make it understandable. So you're going to want to go with black and white for your figures. So this is the first place to look. Have this by your side when you're creating your figures. And if you end up getting rejected from the first journal and having to change it, that's just part of the deal. But this is where you're going to start when you start manufacturing your figure in general. You want to make sure that you adhere to the author guidelines, because that's the first person who's going to look at your submission. And if your tables and figures violate any of the rules that they state right here, well, you might get a desk reject right there, and it won't even go out for review. So this is a great place to start. But this gives you some just real general comments. I'm going to go into some more of like the nitty and gritty of it. So let's go back to our 10 comments, 10 simple rules. That's your audience right there. It's the reviewers. It is your editor. Number 2, identify your message. This is just like writing. This is something I've come to find over time. You want to make sure that with each paragraph you write down, you know what you're trying to get across. With your figure, you don't want to just put data on there just because. You want to be able to identify, what am I trying to show here? Am I trying to show a difference in these two groups? Am I trying to show a difference over time? What's the best way for me to do that? Number 3, adapt the figure to support the medium overall. So wherever it's going to be placed, if it's going to be on a poster, if it's going to be in a publication, that's going to be different. You're going to have different font sizes, all those sorts of things. Generally, we're talking about publication today, so I'll go over some of the general rules for that. Number 4, captions are not optional. That's going to be the end of our lecture today. We're going to be talking about what happens when you finish making your tables, finish making your figures, and you're ready to send it to your co-authors. How do you do that? Where do you put those captions? How does it go forward from there? Number 5, oh my gosh. When I see a presentation or a publication that comes across with figures that I can recognize as default settings from Microsoft Excel or from any of the statistical software, that's even worse. We'll talk about that in a little bit later. When I see that, I immediately think, well, this person didn't care enough to even try and format this. All they did was cut and paste this figure from their stats program or from Excel and slap it on in there. Once again, that goes back to that whole comment is, if they didn't take the time to make a good figure, did they take enough time to do good science? Use color effectively. You can see in this one right here, this is a figure that requires color because it's about coloring. For most of the figures in our field, you do not need color. So I would recommend going with black and white. Misleading the reader. This is a classic one with figures. Changing your axis size, putting breaks in there without actually labeling that there are breaks, changing the scale from one part to next to make it seem different than it actually is. You don't want to do that. That's one of the big no-nos for your figures. You want to, once again, show your message and highlight what the differences are, but you do not want to just change things in order to make that clear. And if you look at this figure right here, we can kind of bring this one up. What they have here is they look at these different disc sizes, and then there's the bars that represent the disc size. Well, if you just chop them off right here and expand that, you can see that there's a difference overall in those bars that looks bigger than it actually is. So you don't want to do that. Chart junk. Let's see if I can bring this one up. Aha. Fantastic picture right here. Look at that. I've seen spaghetti graphs like this before. What does this tell me if I see this? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Make sure that you avoid what's going on. If you look at these kind of, it's probably a data reduction from, some time series of different, millivolts or something like that. This tells us absolutely nothing. And you can see right here, we have poor scaling of our y-axis down at the bottom. Ugh, I see this one, I'm throwing it in the garbage right away. We also have a big no-no for figures. We have our lines in the background. You do not want those grid lines in the back of any of your figures. You want a nice white background and some nice clear evidence right up front, some nice clear data. So chart junk, get that out of here. Message trumps beauty. I've seen some really pretty looking figures overall that don't really help explain the story. You want to make sure that your message is clear. That goes back to number 2. Identify your message overall. Last one, get the right tool. There are tons of different, here's all the different types of graphing programs that you can use out there. Matplotlib, R, that's becoming a big one right now. R is pretty cool if you can understand the programming language, because with it you can make the figure look however you want. I'm more of a drop-down kind of old school guy. I like using Microsoft Excel. Dr. Smith likes using SigmaPlot. That's a big one, and that's pretty common in our field. But these are all different programs. Use one that you know how to use. Don't use one just because it's a novelty overall. Use one that gets the message across clearly. Okay? So that's where we're going to start. And now let's move on to creating our first table. So what we're going to do here is we're going to take some actual data from a study that I'm currently working on. Okay? So don't go spreading these results across the internet. No screenshots of this posted to, Reddit or anything like that. But what we're looking at here is we're looking at mood and within males and females who have different levels of habitual water intake. Okay, it's pretty right on the nose for what you would expect for a class with me learning about some hydration effects overall. And what we have right here is we have our all. So this is all of our subjects, our low, moderate, and high drinkers, and then we have our different variables down our left hand column right here. And what you generally want to say is you want to have your groups up on the top, and you're going to have your dependent variables here on your y-axis or up and down in your leftmost column. And big things to notice is we always have our units after all of our variable labels. And then we have kind of subdivisions with each of these. So we have females and males within each of our categories. We have our statistical test right here for males and females within the groups. So is there a difference there? And then if you notice over here, we have our statistical test, which is our one-way ANOVA for low, moderate, and high. Is there a difference between these groups overall? Okay, and then last but not least, you can see we have some couple more markers of significance right here, and in our figure caption we have the asterisk says that high is significantly different from low, so that this group right here is different from this one. And then our ampersand right there, whoops, I haven't put that one in yet, but it looks like the ampersand is going to be high, is going to be significantly greater than moderate overall. It looks like it was only for this subject demographic here in activity. Minutes per week is what we measured here. So what we want to do is figure out how we can replicate this table. And it looks pretty clean. It looks great, but it's a little bit more complicated than just, putting some data in a table. So where do we start? If we're going to make our own figure, let's move my picture over just a little bit to give us a little bit more space here. We'll cram this guy just so we get 2 there. Where do we start? Well, we start with our results. Okay, so, and start with our data. Let's use Jump. Jump is what I use for a lot of my stats right now. It's kind of a drop-down version of SAS, which SAS is very powerful, but it's all program-based. Once again, I'm not a big computer programmer, so I like the easy drop-down menus. Okay, and we can see we have all of our different variables here, and what we're going to do is we're going to do a quick little one, and I've already pre-programmed this here. And what we're going to do, we have our nice dependent variables here. So all these variables that are in our rightmost column or leftmost column are in our responses. We have our total water intake group, so low, moderate, and high. That's the group right there. And then we also have sex, which is going to be females and males right there. So that's what it's going to give us by. We'll press OK. And here is our nice little results. We can minimize that. And now, just to get the data that we need that ANOVA to give us our statistical tests between the groups. And then you can see that this is the women up here. We have the F for female, and then we also want to get our means and standard deviations. So now, for each of our tests, we have the means right here, the standard deviation, and then we also have this value right here, which will tell us if there's a difference between those. So now that we have that, let's minimize this guy a little bit. And we're not going to do the total water intake, because you can see that's a little different. I grouped this based on their grouping, okay? So our low group for females was less than 2.6 liters per day, and our men's low group was less than 3.08 liters per day, okay? What we're going to do, we'll go down to our age. I believe that's right here. Yep, analysis of age, okay? So we'll put this guy right here. And then what we want to do is, you're going to build these tables as you go, but we can kind of look here and say, okay, well, how many rows do we have? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27 rows, okay? And we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 columns overall. So we're going to insert. We're going to go over here to this first table, and we'll go to Insert, Table. And one point I want to make here is you're probably going to have some of your data in Microsoft Excel too, and you're going to be tempted to make your table in Excel. You can cut and paste from Excel into Microsoft Word, but when you submit your manuscript and when you send it to your co-authors, it needs to be in Microsoft Word. So I like to kind of skip the middleman there and just make the table in Microsoft Word. It saves me a step in the long run, and it keeps things a little bit more simple for me. So let's go on. We said we want 7 columns right there, and we don't have the ability to really go down far enough, so we're just going to go with 8. And we're going to go to 22. So to get to 22, we just keep, not enter, you're going to press tab to keep getting rows. So that's 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. And we can just kind of keep this going as it's going. And we can add in as we go. Okay, so what we know is our first one is going to have our all, low, mod, high, and our p-value in it. Okay, and we can kind of work backwards here. We have our p-value right here. We have our high. We have our mod. We have our low. And we have our all. Then our first column is going to be N for our number of subjects in each. And we have our females and our males. Okay? And this looks very different than this one does right here. So let's start to get this into the kind of framework that we want. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to table design, and we have borders right here. And the first thing you'll notice is in all tables that are made for publication, there are no vertical lines. There's only some rare instances where you're going to put a vertical line in there. So we want to remove all those to start. Borders. Inside, vertical border. We are going to unclick that one right there. Borders. We want no left border and no right border. Okay, so we're getting a little bit closer to what we want right there. Okay, now with this one, another thing that I find very helpful is when you go to table layout right there, clicking and selecting this view grid lines. Now what that does is it shows us where the actual edges of each cell are located, and that really helps when you're kind of formatting everything. Okay, so we have our N, we have our female and our male. With our female and our male overall, we can see that in the one to the right, that's a little bit, that column is narrower. So what we do right there is we just drag that right like that, and we'll drag it across. We know all of these ones right here are centered and bold. There we go. And one thing you'll notice is if we take away our grid lines, we have this nice little gap between all and low. And the way that you get that gap to differentiate some of your subgroups is, once again, go to grid lines. We're going to insert a column to the right. So we're going to add in a column, and we're going to make it as narrow as possible. Then what we can do is, under our all, low, mod, and high, we want to have this underline. You can see, once again, if we take it off, there we go. There's an underline under all those ones, but there's none here and there's none under P. So if we go back, highlight this guy, view our grid lines, select the cell, go to table design, borders, we want to get rid of that bottom border under there and under our P. And now we are good. We don't have that. If we go back to our table, right there, and take our grid lines away, you can see, oh, we've taken away that little dot there. And also, let's remove it from over the F and over the N. Border, bottom gone, over the F, border, bottom gone. Okay, now let's go down. We're going to do our age column. And let's see if we can just look at this one, and we can see that there's no line between our males and our females. Also, our N, we need to merge. So let's go back. Let's look at our layout, view some grid lines. There we go. We know we want to merge these two right here. There it is, merge cells. Good. Now we want to align that N so it's on the left-hand side, but middle, top to bottom. Great. From our figure right here, we know that there are 52 and 49. And then if we go to our groups, you can count out your numbers right here. For females, we have 17, 18, and 17. There we go. 17, 18, 17. And once again, center, center. Now we're looking good. Okay? So let's move on down, and we're going to go to age. We're just going to put age in the next column. Okay? So we're going to eliminate these two right here, and we're just going to do age. And we want that in years. Pressing enter will get that years down to the next row. And if you look for age, instead of having two rows like we did for our subject numbers, for age we have 1, 2, 3 because we need room for that statistical test between males and females. Okay, so what we're going to do, 1, 2, 3, we'll merge those cells, and then once again we'll center right there. We have our females and our males. For our number, we can just... And now we want to go to our low, moderate, and high. I don't have the output right now up for my all group. That would require me just to do it a little bit different for stats. But you want to have this up. Sometimes what I'll do, and you'll see this when I move on to our figure in a little minute, I will copy and paste the output that I've used in the table right into that Microsoft Word document. That way I know and can reference it quickly if I have to stop halfway through making the table because I had to go teach a class. I can just leave that right there and know I can come right back to it. And if I send it to co-authors, they can know, okay, there's the analysis. That's the test that you did to get that. It just makes everybody feel warm and fuzzy inside. Okay, so let's add in our low, moderate, and high for our group right here. So low, moderate, and high, mean. We have our levels right here that are associated with our different groups. And we know based on our coding that 1 is low, 2 is moderate, and 3 is high. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 17, 18, 17. All right, so for our age, we have 41.5235. And then you're going to go to insert, symbol, and you can see I already have it right here. You might need to go to more symbols and all the way to this one, and our plus minus is in my recently used, but it's going to be in our mathematical operators, I believe. You might have to do a little bit of searching to find your plus minus overall. So we're just going to insert that guy right there. You'll press insert. You'll see that it goes in right there, but you're still in this box. So if I try and type right now, I'm going to get nothing. You have to make sure to close that box, and then you can go on. Okay. Now we have our standard error. We don't want that. We want our standard deviation. So 41.5335 plus or minus 14.391904. Wow. Now the thing that you want to take into account when you're doing this is you want to round to a number that is appropriate. Okay? And for the sake of this, does it matter if we have age out to 6 significant figures? Absolutely not. Generally, my rule of thumb for putting the significant figures is however you would communicate that information to somebody else, that's how you want to place it in here. Do we measure half years? No, not necessarily. Unless we were doing some sort of aging study where number of months was really important for infants or something like that, that would be important. But for people in their 40s, the average age of between 30 and 60 for this study, it doesn't matter if they're 41 or 42. All we want to show with these subject demographics right here is that our low, moderate, and high group for females and males were of similar ages. That enables us to say, okay, age was not a factor in their differences in mood that we're going to show in a little bit. Okay, so let's bring this down. We'll round it. 42 plus or minus 14. Okay, right there. Remember, you want the same number of significant digits for both the mean and your standard deviation right there. Okay, so 42, and the next one is 43. And what I'm going to do here is copy this, and I'm going to go, let's get rid of that 43 real quick. One thing I'll do, I will just paste in all those cells. Now, instead of having to go into my symbol and insert one of those plus minuses every time I want to put a plus minus, they're already there. And I can go and I can just easily delete it from the cells that I don't need it in. And it's already there to start with. One thing you'll notice, depending on the journal, some will require that plus minus sign. Others will have the standard deviation in parentheses, like that. Check the author guidelines. They'll generally tell you if it's not in the author guidelines. What do? Well, I will go. Let's see if I can find it here. I'll go to the journal. Look at this. Here's Medicine, Science, Sports, and Exercise, MSSE. I pulled up one of their studies. This was a study. Let's see if I have it. Yep, here we go. Daily changes of resting metabolic rate in elite rugby union players. What am I going to do? So this was from the most recent issue. I'm going to go down and I'm going to look, not at this table because that's a little bit funky. This is more of a protocol table. Not a huge fan of that, but let's look at one with actual data in it. Well, would you look at that? Their plus minus is right there. So if I'm submitting to this journal, I'm putting plus minuses in. I am not putting parentheses. There we go. Okay. So we'll go back to this one right here, and we will do our 43 plus minus 16. And then our high group is going to be 41. We have our plus minus that we have to copy on over. 41 plus minus, and it looks like 14 right there. Okay, and if you look, that matches up right with this. Okay, for our age. Now for our P. Here's our P value right here, 0.8834. What we want to do with this one is, once again, make sure that you're consistent with your p-values all the way down. If you have 3 significant digits for all of them, that's going to look very, very nice. You can do 2, you can do 3. Obviously, I wouldn't recommend 1 significant digit because when you're looking for a statistical difference at 0.05 or a 95% chance of not having a type 1 error, then you need at least 2 significant digits. So we'll put that one in right here, 0.883. Once again, depending on the journal, what I would also do is look to see if they put that 0 in there before their p-values. Some statisticians will say you do not want that if there's no 0 there. Some will say that you do want it there just to identify that there is a 0 before that decimal point. That's going to be journal specific, so make sure you check that out as well. All right, let's get these all lined up once again in our layout. There we go. We have our nice figure there. And the last thing we will do with this table before we move on to some of our figures is we will look at this top line. Generally what you'll see in tables, if you go to table design, we want that top line and generally the bottom line. I haven't done it yet on this one. We want that top and bottom line to be a little bit thicker. What that does is it tells the reader this is the top of the table, this is the bottom of the table. Sometimes when it's in the text, it's hard to tell where the table starts and ends because they can be so tight. So you want that a little bit thicker line. So in order to do that, you just select your line thickness. I'll usually do 2 1/4 right there. And if we want our border, we're going to go right to here, top border. And you can see that just happened right there. Same thing, we want our bottom border. You can see it's still selected. We're going to click bottom border, and we have a little bit thicker line there. Let's just finish formatting this age one so we can make it very clear what we want. Let's go back to into our table layout. We don't want to view our grid lines. If we look at our N overall, what we have is we have kind of a dashed line separating our variables, and we have no lines in between. So let's do this. We will highlight the rows where we want to remove, table design, border, top border, and you can see what happened was the first thing it did was change it. It changed it to that thick line because we had that identified. If I go back in, you can see that's grayed out for top border. Now you click it and it goes away. Very nice. So we want the same thing here. We want that border to go away. So we'll do top border, makes it thick. Top border again, now it's gone. Same thing here. We can also, if you want, you can go to no border as your selection and do that with top. That will give you the same thing, okay? The last thing we want to do is be able to change this line from a solid line to a dotted line. So once again, highlight all the columns that touch the line that you want to change. We're going to go to, yes, we want a border, but what do we want? Now we want that kind of dotted line. So that the one we used in our figure was this really small dot, and that's going to be our top line, top border, and you can see now we have changed that to a nice little dot, okay? One thing you might notice is these 3 columns right here, they're a little bit different in width. So something you can do there within your layout, I believe, is you can distribute your columns. What that will do is make them all about the same width, okay? And if you look, if you click in those, you can see, okay, that's telling us we're at 1.21 inches wide, 1.21 inches wide, 1.21 inches wide. If we want our all to be the same, we can go 1.21 inches wide. And now all of these 4 columns have the same exact width. It might not seem like that big of a deal, but especially when you get to tables that have a lot more data in them, having tight formatting is going to make a big difference when people go to read your figure overall or read your table overall. And you want them to have an easy time. You're trying to make it easy for the reviewer, editor, co-author, whoever to say, yes, let's move this on to publication. Let's accept this, okay? That's the whole purpose of putting the time and effort into kind of meticulously editing your tables and figures, okay? I won't go through doing the same exact thing for all the other rows here. I know you're all kind of, giving yourself a sigh of relief there. So just keep in mind, those are the ways to manipulate this. There's going to be an exercise posted tomorrow where you'll be having to do this for your practice. I'm going to give you just a data set in Microsoft Excel, and you're going to make your table using that, using similar guidelines to this. Okay, so let's move on. That's tables. Generally, you're going to do that. Let's move on to figures. All right, so figures, I said I did all of my tables in Microsoft Word. Well, for all of my figures, I'm going to do those in Excel. So Here you can see that I've cut and pasted my results, and what this is this is our visual analog scale for alertness within our women of our 3 different fluid intake groups. So what you can see here is our women who drank the least had lower alertness than the women who drank the most habitually. And what we want to be able to do is show that comparison, okay? And we've done it here with this figure, and what I want to do is show you how to make that figure, okay? So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to take your results. This one is a little bit different because this is looking at relative water intake, milliliters of water per kilogram of lean body mass. This is absolute. We're just going to use absolute for this figure right now. Actually, we have both of them. Here's our groups, low, moderate, and high, and then we have relative low, relative moderate, relative high. So how are we going to do this figure overall? Well, first you need the data from these different groups. So we need our means and our standard deviations for each of them. Okay, you can see that we can pull those means and standard deviation from right here. What I used to do is I would do this directly from my analysis big old data sheet that I have, like my master data sheet. I'd save a separate copy of it just for making my figures. What I've found is that can get very confusing very quickly because you have so many different variables. I find it much better if you just isolate the test that you're trying to show. Once again, if you go back to our 10 tips for making good figures, what's your message? In this one, we're trying to show that alertness is different within groups that have different levels of habitual hydration. Okay, so if we want to do that, we just take our means and our standard errors or standard deviations for both of our groups, and I have brought those into here. Now you want your means in one row and your standard deviations in one row as well. Do not put those in column format for this. It's going to make it a lot harder when it comes to making your table. So now we have our information. We're going to highlight that. That's where our table is. We're going to go to Insert, and then we will go to Charts, and it's telling us already what kind of charts do we want. All right, and so if we go to All Charts, we do want a clustered column. Basically, we want these guys together and these guys together as well, and you'll notice that we have a gap here. That's the reason we have this gap here. So if you want your gap between the 2 different groups, you just put that in. Okay, so let's click OK. Well, that looks very different than what we have over here. So we got some work to do to get it up to par. And what we'll see here is we have our means and our standard deviations. Do we want the standard deviations in this figure? Absolutely not. Those are going to be our error bars. So we'll just click on those. You can see that they all get highlighted, press the delete key, and they go away. Very nice. Okay, number 2, we want to get rid of our title right here because that's going to go in the figure captions. So get rid of our mean. Okay, we're getting a little bit closer. We don't want our legend in the figure at all. That's gone. And we know that this is in the wrong place, so we're going to get rid of that. Whoops, I don't want that. Let's go back. If you look on this little plus mark, that's going to tell you what you want. Do we want the grid lines? Absolutely no. We can also go into formatting, and that's if we right click on this and we go to not format chart area, that'll give us a little bit more information. If we're here, format data series, and we can go to, or if we click on this, here we go. Do we want if we click directly on that, axis options, we do not want that. All right, I figured it out. We just got to move this guy down. Let's get rid of that alertness. So we're just going to delete that right there. There it goes. We will put this back up here so we know what it is. Now it's out of it. Okay, we've deleted all those, but we want to have an axis over here. So we will format this axis. Back here, we want a line, a solid line, a black line, We want it a little bit thicker, 1.5. Right here, you want square caps and a mitered joint. That tells you how those lines are going to connect, what they're going to look like when they do that connection. Then if you go over here, we're going to want some tick marks. We want those different. And what you'll notice is I have a little bit different scale here. So we want our minimum to be 0, but our maximum to be 140. Okay. The reason we're going to adjust that to 140 is because we got to fit our standard errors in there. Okay. Our major units are good at 20. That's what we want. And then if we want our tick marks, for major, you can see we have ones that go through. Inside, outside, or across. There we go. And for minor, we have inside only. And that gives us a little bit of both of those. And you can see here, we have our minors at 10. So these minors are too close. That's all scrunched in there. Let's get it to 10. And that just gives us a little bit more demarcation between all those different ones. Now, let's change our font overall. I am not a fan of Calibri. Some people like it. Straight up Arial all the time for figures. In your actual text of your paper, it's usually going to have serif. Your figure is going to have sans serif. That's the best way that people can see stuff. So I'm just going to change that over to Arial right now. I'm also going to update the size. Let's move that to 12. You want it to be nice and readable overall. Another thing you'll notice is default. This is like makes me go crazy. Default color for the text is this weird gray. Make it black. Just like the stones. Paint it black. Okay. Same thing. Last thing. We got to go axis options right here. For this one, we want our line, solid line, black, 1.5, square, miter. Getting close. Okay, so what about our overlap in general? Where does that come in? Series overlap. So we want to make it a little bit different. If we look over here, we can see that our series overlap is 0 and our gap width is 50%. So let's go back here. We'll make this one 0. Make this one 50. And now we have similar sizes. Getting closer. Okay, so now I want the coloring to be right. This one I have as black, okay? So you'll notice that if you click on them, first time you click, all of these are highlighted. If you click a second time, now you're looking at just one series within the data set overall. So we'll go there, we will fill it, solid fill, we want black, no transparency. We also want a solid line around the outside. Same thing, same size, 1.5, square, miter. And then if we go over here, solid fill, but we don't want that one black, we want that one white. But we do want a border, solid line, black, 1.5, square, miter. Really nice. Okay, so I'm not going to go through all the different pattern fills. I'll do one here for us. Okay, fill, we're going to do a pattern fill. And if we want those stripes, we'll just go find it right here. Vertical stripes is this guy. Okay, and then once again, foreground, black. There we go. And you'll see that this one's different. So what we want there is we want the foreground to be white and the background to be black. And now we're getting a little bit closer. We may have used a slightly different one. Okay. Oh, missed one thing. We don't have a border. Solid line. Black. 1.5. Square. Miter. Now we're getting there. Okay, the last thing that we need to do for this figure overall is we need to add our standard deviation bars. This can be a big frustration for a lot of people when they're making figures, and there's a quick, easy way to make sure that it gets done right, okay? The quick, easy way to do it is to make sure that you have your standard deviations in your file right here, okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to click on here, and if you look, if you click your little plus sign right here, error bars is an option. So we're going to click on that right there. You got this little arrow next to it, and that gives you some more options for what the error bars are. Do I want the standard error? Okay, that's just going to estimate the standard error. Do I want a percentage of what I had? Do I want a standard deviation? Well, what that's going to do is just look at the standard deviation across the board, and it's going to give the same exact error bars for every bar. We have different standard deviations for all of our bars. So we need to go to more options. You go to more options, okay? Do we want plus and minus? Generally for these, you only want plus. So we're going to click just plus. Do we want a cap on there? Yes, we do. Okay. And then you're going to go to custom for specify value. Specify value, your positive error value. You're just going to highlight those cells. Press enter. I put negative values in that are exactly the same, just in case you want those. Some journals require them. Press enter. Click OK. And there you go. You can see that our error bars are now consistent. Our low group had a low value but the high standard deviation, whereas our high group had a high value but low standard deviation. And you can see that that's reflected here. One last thing we got to do, we got to format those. Okay, error bars. We go back to our paint bucket. That allows us to change the color from this dumb gray to black. 1.5, square, miter. Now we got some nice looking error bars on there. Okay, so after we're able to format that in here, what I would recommend is copying that, and if you have other variables, you do it there. So now what we do is we copy our figure right there. We're going to open up PowerPoint. And for this, you can see that I had 4 different variables that changed with different amounts of water intake. We had depression, vigor, and a variable called total mood disturbance. So I'm going to take that figure that I just made in Excel, and I'm going to paste it. And I want to do paste use destination theme in embed workbook. If I do that, what that enables me to do is if I have to change something in here, I can actually edit the data, and it will pull up, look at that, the same workbook that we were just working on. And I can change my values right in here. Let's say, oh, I forgot an outlier that I just eliminated, and that changed my mean, and I'm going to rerun my stats. Well, I can do it right here in my PowerPoint instead of having to go back to Excel, recopy it. Either way is good, but I just find that this way is a little bit easier. Okay? Now, what you'll notice is this one's like not quite the right size. I like to keep things in a panel. You know, you're going to do this. Making panel figures is a little bit challenging. What I do first is make sure that I know what size it's going to be. So I'll click on this one right here, and you go to Format, or Chart, Format, and right here, we know this is 3 inches by 4.9 inches. So if we click on our new one, right here, 3 inches, 4.9. We're the same. Uh-oh. Now we have our figures, titles are off. So we're going to change the font size down to 10. If you notice over here, that's going to be font size 10. Okay, we're getting closer. Last thing we need to do to get this in line is I'll bring it over and use some of my guidelines that I have there, and then I'm just going to use my arrow keys. Okay, but the question now is, how do I know when it's in the right position? Because I want it to line up. I want this one to line up with the one on the right and the one below it. So one thing I'll do, I'll insert a shape right here, and I'll try to get right on this vertical axis and draw a line just up like that. So I know if I look at that shape format, the width is 0, so I know that's straight vertical, straight perpendicular. And so I click back on this guy right here, and now I know I've already lined up my x-axis with the x-axis on this one, so that's good. Okay, click on the figure, use my arrow keys to move it over bit by bit, and you can see if I want to line it up now, it's nice and lined up. That is great. Okay, one thing I'll do then, I'll kind of say, okay, well, let me move this. Are my numbers lined up? Those look pretty good. What about my titles? Oh, titles aren't lined up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have to move this title. Now the titles are lined up. We have that nice comparison. You can see that line goes through the letter that identifies what panel I am talking about when I go to my figure caption. Okay, and all the way through. The last thing I'll do is kind of like a double check. I'll move it horizontal. And once again, if you go to shape format, you look at height equals 0. and I'll go straight here and I'll look, okay, does that top tick mark go through both? Yes, it does. Looks pretty good to me. So then you can delete that guy. That just helped us kind of line up. If we go back to our figure and our stats overall, let's go back to right here. We want to find out, okay, what's different? And we know that there's a statistical difference here overall between the three, but if we do our post hoc tests, which are right down here, what this does right here is it tells us within our absolute group, level 1 was different than level 3, and level 3 was also different than level 2. We have our statistical differences there. Same thing with our relative, okay? So to add in our markers of significance, all you do is you're going to just insert, and you're going to use a text box and just draw that out. You'll do your asterisks. If you want to do your dagger right here, once again, that's in insert, symbol. It's going to bring up your symbol box again. You can see that I have it as one of my commonly used ones right there, and you can insert that. That just tells you what you want for your symbols. I already have a couple already made, and so what I'm going to do with this one is I'm going to take that box, and generally what I do is I try and make it so that it's centered. Okay, and you can see when I click from side to side, when I use the mouse, it's not going to let me do where I want to go. Okay, so once again, I'll go back to using my keypad. And I want that bottom line of the text box to be right on top of the top of my error bar. And then I will move it so it's centered right over that. Okay, let's grab our other one. Okay, and we'll use our keypad once again. There we go. So now we've put our markers of significance. We can see that we have that here. With all of your figures, we're going to do two things with them. We're going to save them in here, and then we're also going to save them. So you're going to make one Microsoft PowerPoint file that has all your figures in it. Okay, it's a nice place to kind of keep them all. But then, this is figure number 3. We're going to file, save as, and we're going to go to, we're in our lecture 5, tables and figures. We're going to save this as, you might want to save it as a PDF. You might want to save it as a JPEG, maybe a TIFF file. How do we know that? Well, you go back. Oh, I closed my submission guidelines, but it's going to be in your submission guidelines, what file format they want you to be in. I usually save it in JPEG. That's going to save it as a photo. Which slides? Just this one. It's going to save just that one slide. And then if we go to our folder, look at that. We have our mood slide that's as a photo. Okay, so the last thing we're going to do, let's go here, or actually we will go to a paper right there. Sorry about that, guys. There we go. And you can see in this manuscript, I have put in my tables. Table 1, Table 2, this is a separate one. Then you have your figure captions. And then what you're going to do is you're going to put your figures in without your captions. The figures go on a separate page. This is kind of a remnant of old figure capturing when they had to be kind of input manually. With some of the new technology that a lot of the submission sites are using now, it's not really necessary, but it's just kind of a holdover from that time. Okay, so we have our figures, and now if we wanted to insert our figure here, we go insert, blank page, insert, and then we would do picture. We would go to our lecture 5. Look at that, it's right there. Insert that photo, and now our photo is in there. If we wanted to move that around a little bit easier, we can do it just like so, and we can even crop it down to get rid of that figure caption because we have the figure caption elsewhere. What you're going to want to do with this is you want to make your figure as large as possible for your audience to be able to see, especially your co-authors. You can see here that these are kind of in the portrait format, but with this table up here, table 1, this is a landscape one. In order to do that, all you have to do is insert a section break. You can see that this is section break this is section 2 up here because it tells me footer of section 2. If I go to the bottom of that page and go to layout and then insert a break right there on the next page, it'll change the next page to a new section. Then when you go to your next section, if I wanted to change this, all you do is you go under layout, orientation, and you choose landscape, and it changes only that page to landscape. Makes it much easier to read. You can have nice big font in that, and that'll make it really nice for your co-authors to read. Okay, so in this lecture, a lot of information on how to format some tables and figures, but when it comes down to it, you're not going to actually understand how to do this until you get in there and mess around with Microsoft Excel, Word, and PowerPoint. But once again, our goal with making and taking the time to make really, really nice tables and figures is letting our co-authors, letting the editors, letting the reviewers know, I care about this. I'm going to take the time to make this look good because I took the time with my science and I want to make sure it's presented well. This is going to have a big effect when you present things at a conference, when you present them to your mentor. I really like seeing nice tables and figures. It just makes things a lot easier as you go through the review process. Obviously, the science has to be good to back it up. The data has to be good. But once you have that good data, you want to be able to present it in a way that, is right for that good data. So with that, just keep your eye out tomorrow for the exercise number 5, and that's going to be the creation of a table and a figure on your own. You're going to basically create all the documents that we created today. So you'll have the Excel, you'll have the Word, you'll have the PowerPoint. I'll want you to save some JPEGs as well. You're just going to go through the practice of doing this so that when you start working on your master's thesis, you've already done the work and you know how to do it. Okay? With that, I will leave you for today. Have a great rest of the week.